Hello, my name's Paul Gilbert, and I'm Professor of Clinical Psychology here at the University of Derby, and I've been President of the Compassionate Mind Foundation, and I've studied compassion for some years. And I'd like to provide a series of talks looking at how compassion can help us in these days of trauma and tragedy. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to show you some PowerPoints which will highlight some key points for us. And in order to do that, I have to go and share my screen. So I'm just going to lean forward for a little bit. There we go. And I go onto that system there and that system there. And then I click there and hopefully that will come up. There we are. Okay, so the talk really is going to look at the nature of compassion and how compassion can help us with some of the fear that is spreading around, concept of safe relating, and how using compassion is going to be a very important motivation for how we address the situation when the virus eventually leaves us. So let's firstly think carefully about what we mean by compassion, because there's a lot of different ideas about what compassion is on the website. So for us, we see compassion as basically a motivation. Now, all motivations have things that activate them, and then you have a response. So in the case of compassion, what motivates us is a signal, some kind of signal or awareness of suffering and distress. When we perceive that signal, then we are motivated to want to do something about it. And that means trying to alleviate and prevent suffering and distress. So that's basically the definition, that's basically its motivation. But what's interesting is that when you look at this more deeply, what you see is that in that desire to engage with suffering will be a degree of courage, okay? So you can think about a firefighter going into a burning house to save somebody. That's complete compassion, isn't it? You know, risking your life for somebody. And the same with our medical staff. Many times when we have to engage with suffering, we do need a little bit of courage, sometimes a lot of courage, okay? And it's the same when we're dealing with our own fears. Sometimes we need courage to be able to deal with our fears. So courage is central to compassion. The second element is learning how to respond wisely, because it's very easy to rush in, not really knowing what we're doing. So if I was to run into a burning house not knowing what I was doing, I could end up getting injured myself. So wisdom and skill are central to compassion too. So these are the two things, and compassion involves courage and wisdom. That's the key. That's the key. So let's have a look at this then and see how we can use certain types of wisdoms. Well, one wisdom is to recognize that the way we think about situations is important for how we orientate ourselves to them. So we need to change our thinking from social distancing to safe relating. There's been a lot of criticism of the concept of social distancing. The World Health Organization suggested physical distancing, but the problem is the word distancing again, because that's a psychology that we don't want to engage. What we want to engage is the concept of safe relating. And safe relating captures the two key things here, which is the importance of safeness, what is safe, safe distance, and so on, but also the concept of relating, the importance of relating. And this is important because, in fact, we are actually relating more now, and we do need our relationships. What's going to get us through this horrendous time is our relationships with each other, our support, compassion, and helpfulness with each other. But it's doing it safely is the key. That's the key, isn't it, really? So a couple of simple things then also is the fact that when we focus on this concept that we want to relate safely, we focus on the concept of relating safely, we focus on the word safe, or we focus on the word compassion, this will have an impact on how we think about this virus. So we focus on the word fear and distancing, that's a different psychology. Okay, so safe and relating, these are going to have massive impacts on how we think about what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing. And as I say, thirdly, it's very important that when we think about compassion, although people will talk about compassion in terms of kindness or empathy or helpfulness, these are ways of being compassionate. They're not compassion themselves in our view, they're ways of being compassionate. The root of compassion, though, is this courage plus wisdom, engaging in suffering wisely. Okay, so that we want to hold on to that. So let's have a look and see if we can use our wisdom to understand a little bit about this virus and why it's giving us such a hard time. Now, it's giving us a hard time not only because it can cause death in some people, but because of things like its reproductive ratio. Now, what that means is, if, for example, I get the virus, right, and I cough and sneeze, then I could give it to up to 3 people. Now, scientists dispute these figures. It might be 4, it might be more. But the point about it is that it's more than 1. Influenza tends to be 1-on-1, but this virus has a greater spreadability. And then those 3 people give it to another 3 people. So now we've got 9 who are infected. And in that group of people, there may be one person who has a compromised immune system or MS or whatever, and they now are in trouble, or they're old or something like that. And then, of course, those 9 people give it to another 27, and then the 27 give it to 51. So you can see that what you've got here is, because of the spreadability, you've got this rapid growth of the spread in the environment, in the community. And also the figure to be aware of is what is called the series interval, which is the speed at which the virus transfers from one person to another and symptoms start to show. Estimates for this virus is about 5 to 7 days. Now that's important because that really makes things tricky in terms of calculating things like death rates in relationship to cases. So we can see then that because of the spreadability ratio factor, reproductive ratio of this virus, we've got a curve that looks a little bit like this exponential curve. You can see how and why that happens. And what we're trying to do, of course, is to flatten the curve. And that means stopping, or slowing, I should say, the spread of the virus as best we can. And the way in which we do that, the way in which we flatten the curve, is, of course, to stop transmitting it between ourselves. That's the key thing. And in order to not do that, we have to try and keep this safe relating, relating to each other, but relating at a safe distance, or a safe space between us. Having a safe space between us is also a nice way to think about it, or at least a better way to think about it. So the government has given lots and lots of advice on what to do personally in terms of one's personal hygiene, washing one's hands, not touching one's face, and also washing your hands in warm water, 25 degrees or above is good, because that kills the virus, and so on. And part of the reasons for doing this is because we want to stem the flow of patients coming into hospital. Whereas if we get overloaded and we can't treat all the clients coming in, patients coming in, that's not good. So we're trying to reduce the flow into the hospitals. And unfortunately, as you probably all know from what the media have been telling you, that one of the reasons for this is because we've so decimated our health service. We've been running at maximum capacity for some years. The medical profession has been advising the government time after time after time, there's a pandemic coming, you've got to prepare for it. We can't continue to run the health service on these narrow margins. We're sooner or later going to be caught out, and we've been caught out. So again, part of the problem is because of decisions that have been made in the past. It's not just this virus, it's not just this spreadability. They are important factors, but also decisions made in the past, and that has got to be addressed in the future. So other things to consider is that you'll see in the newspapers is what is called mortality rate. This is simply the number of deaths divided by the number of cases times 100. And that gives you the rate at which people are dying compared to the number of people that are getting the virus. It's a little bit tricky because of that series interval, because some of the cases are about a week behind, something like that. So that getting the accurate figures are very tricky. Our medical teams, epidemiological teams, these are not easy calculations. And some feel that it's around 1%, some less than that, and other people say, oh, no, it's quite a bit more than that. The mortality rate could be 3% or higher. So at the moment, it's one of the don't knows. We really don't know. And another reason we don't know is because we haven't got testing. We just don't know how many people have had the virus or had the virus and have done okay. We just don't know that. We also need to recognize who's dying, because this is not evenly distributed in our communities. Older people are much more vulnerable than younger people. People that have underlying health problems are much more vulnerable. And sometimes people have an underlying health problem and they didn't even realize it. They might have a problem with the heart or whatever, and they didn't even realize it. And the virus is a little nasty because it can go for the weak spots, but it's not an evenly distributed curve. And the younger people are much, much more likely to survive than older people. So, and it's the same with who are having complications. Complications are related to age and underlying health conditions as well. And a whole issue here is the undetected cases, because you can see that the larger number of undetected cases, the smaller the percentage is going to be. And that's quite important when we are worrying about our own vulnerabilities, as I will talk about shortly. And the other issue is that people will be dying from the virus. The virus is the killer. For other people, it's the precipitate of a death process that would have been started, or would have been, vulnerabilities will be there. And for other people, they die with the virus, they would die anyway. So if 10% of your population has the virus, say 10%, then 10% of the people who are dying will have the virus. So these, again, are very, very tricky things for our medical staff to kind of work out. So these figures have to be, we have to keep our wisdom about us, because it's tricky when the media just throw figures at us. It's sometimes quite difficult to interpret what's going on. And the other thing is, the media does tend to trade in tragedy, doesn't it? It gives us this, Mrs. Bloggs just before her 61st birthday died and all that, and you think, oh my goodness. The only problem with that is that it may sell newspapers, but it can make us a lot more frightened than we need to be. So I'm going to be looking at that. And this is quite a useful website if you're wanting to contact a website. The other thing that we need to be aware is there's a trade-off in what we're doing, and not all countries have gone down the road that we're doing, because what will actually kill the virus is either a vaccine, which seems a little way off, although perhaps not as way off as we might have feared, and also getting immunity to spread. And in terms of thinking about our own personal fear, what's very important for us to remember that, if we get the virus, the chances are, given those figures and recognizing the people who are vulnerable, we're going to recover. For most of us, we're going to recover. I think, our Prime Minister and Prince Charles, they've all had the virus. And so keep in mind that most of us would recover. And this is one reason that doctors and the government are suggesting that if you have symptoms, to go home, self-isolation, don't go rushing to accident and emergency in the first instance. Only if your symptoms intensify should you need to seek medical advice. Now, this is very important, right? So what that means is that we have to learn to control our own fear. And we need to understand the science of this a little bit, that actually the chances of picking up this virus and something serious happening to us is not zero, but it is low. So each of us can focus on things that are frightening, and when we do that, we can constantly be monitoring ourselves. Oh, can I breathe okay? Am I okay? Am I getting the virus? And people who are anxiety prone, they'll start monitoring and monitoring and monitoring. So just keep in mind that even if you do get the virus, that the chances are by far that you will be fine. This can help our anxiety. And keep in mind too that 20,000 retired care workers have returned to work, right? Now, if they were terrified of getting the virus, that wouldn't happen, would it really? And we could also know that 500,000 have offered themselves as volunteers. So once again, yes, the virus is a killer for some people, but on the whole, most of us, not all of us, but most of us will be okay. So the point about this is, in what we're doing in self-isolation and so forth, is amazing, really, because it's not about me, keeping me safe. It's actually about keeping other people safe. We're actually focusing on the needs of others, and some individuals are actually risking themselves, aren't they? So that can be a major focus in our minds, that not a fear focus, but a care for others focus. So we are taking the measures we are from a deep, compassionate part of ourselves. It's really important that we recognize this is why we're doing what we're doing. We're not doing it out of fear. We're doing it out of compassion for others, okay? We're doing it because we don't want to contaminate other people. And this will help us to orientate and understand our behavior. Nonetheless, it's very important that we recognize the sadness of the losses we have experienced, the people that we have loved that have died as a result of this virus. And also we have to recognize that there have been medical staff, doctors in China and Spain and here, have died as a result of this virus. And for me, when I think about it, I think to myself, well, there are people working today who are indeed risking their lives because they're being subjected to the virus every day, and they're risking their lives to save me. Because if I got ill, they would be there and they would try to save me. That's extraordinary. And when I think about it like that, and I think about the doctors who have given their lives and the nurses who have given their lives, it makes you cry, doesn't it? Really, it just makes you cry. All those people have given their lives to save others. But the important thing is that we then value that. We value their contribution. We value what they've given to us. And again, it's this compassion motivation that is so important, so important. So we don't use it to become scared and frightened. Oh my goodness, doctors have died. What about me? What about me? We recognize that, yes, for whatever reason they did, but they gave their lives for us. And it's that sense of gratitude that's so important for us to hold on to. So courage then is the wisdom tells us that there is an awful lot we don't know about this virus. And that's important because what we're doing at the minute and the measures that we're taking at the moment are a little bit based on not terribly clear about how this is all working out. The courage tells us to focus on the realities and not overstimulate fears in ourselves and others. So not only do we not want to contaminate others with the virus, we don't want to contaminate other people with fear and panic. Okay, so it's safe relating is also safe mind relating to each other's minds in a safe way, not stimulating panic between us. And once again, this is why I think the media who engages in, trading in trauma and trading in tragedy. Mrs. Bloggs was 62 just before her birthday. You see, they don't tell you all the thousands and thousands who actually on that same day recovered. So be careful, right? Let's be careful. Yes, it can kill people, for sure it can. And there are many tragedies because it's done that. But for most of us, we're going to be okay. And let's present that message. So courage also tells us about to remember the amazing things that people are doing and how that we can show, how they show compassionate courage. And of course, that's our hope for the future. Courage also tells us to stand up against our dark side and not get pulled into blaming and shaming and spreading fear or other forms of harm. However, just to finish, the risks of the virus are only one of the risks that we face. They're only one source of fear. They're only one source of stress and anxiety, because we've also got the issues about the pain and the risks of cancelled operations and delayed treatments. My wife has a bad back problem and has a lot of pain, and her clinics have been cancelled, so she just has to wait now. So there's a lot of suffering going on outside of this virus as a consequence of the actions that we're taking. The other thing which is very sad about this virus is you can't visit your relatives. So there they are, they may well be dying, and the staff are medical staff having to deal with very distressed relatives as well. So again, our hearts go out to them because of what's happening with this virus. Loneliness is a very major issue with lockdown, particularly for the elderly, particularly for individuals who are not very good with technology or can't afford technology. So again, we have a serious problem with the amount of loneliness that we're creating as a result of this virus and how to deal with that. Impact on children, we've stopped schooling, right? What is the impact on the children for not going to school, but not going to be able to socialize? So again, we need to be thinking about that in terms of what are we going to do, particularly when we come out of this, to help children regain a sense of support and community and sense of belonging and safeness. And there will be anxieties around jobs, and the government is trying to deal with some of those questions. But I think what we all need to do is to be very empathic to these issues. There are increasing tensions within homes. There are concerns about not only loneliness, but mental health problems. There are fears and worries about the virus themselves, but also the consequences of our actions to control this virus. So that's important. And finally, I'd like to say, we need to be thinking about how we're going to rebuild our communities, because this has been devastating. Absolutely, humanity has never faced this before in this way. We've certainly had many viruses, some of which nearly wiped us all out, like the Black Plague and so on. But this is different, okay? So we're going to have to rebuild our sense of safe connectedness, how we come together to touch, to hug, to kiss, and to feel safe with each other, so we don't keep 6 feet apart or 3 meters apart in the supermarkets. We need to come back together, okay? And we need to mark, not necessarily celebrate, the ending of the virus, street parties. And we need to be planning this now. The Japanese have said they're going to use the Olympics next year as a way of marking the end of the virus and us all coming back together. So this is really, really important. And this is very important for us to start planning this, because this directs our minds to the hope of the future. And that's a very important way in which we can deal with this gloom and this upset and tragedy that we're experiencing right now. So we can be planning for our future. That's important. We think about the future we want to create. And that now is galvanizing many, many groups around the world, recognizing that we do not want to carry on with this neoliberal tradition where it's just compete, compete, compete all the time. We do need to create a world where we start looking after each other. Okay, so there are a number of useful things for you to consider for your own personal work. One is to value your relationships, and if you use technologies, and you should, then please use FaceTime and Skype and so on, so that people can see your face and hear your voice. Don't just text. Text is okay, but they want to see your face and hear your voice. Work out if there are ways that you can be helpful, because we know that feeling appreciated, feeling you've got something you can offer people is a good way of helping us to deal with stress. Don't feel ashamed of your worries if you have worries. There are websites, which we will give later, where you can phone and get support with your worries. It's very understandable to be fearful. And I think it's really quite important that we have governments who understand this and who are empathic to the fear that's being created by the virus and by the lockdown. I have to say, having people stand up and say, oh, well, this might have to continue for 6 months or whatever, is very unhelpful. And they really need some psychologists to advise them. That might be the case, but what we actually need is for people to come along and say, look, this is a terrible situation, and we do understand the problems and difficulties that people are going through, but we need you to know that there are people right now who are working on a virus. Wonderful researchers in Oxford, for example, who worked on the Ebola virus, and they're doing brilliant work, absolutely brilliant work. We're hoping that they can start testing in a couple of weeks or maybe a few months. But anyway, the virus work is going ahead, and it's looking, there are drugs that are looking promising. Okay, so we're working on that, and we have combination of Formula One and Mercedes who have linked up to create these lung pumps, which can be used in place of ventilators in the not so severe cases. So we've got some fantastic things happening around, and we're going to try and end this lockdown as soon as we possibly can. Those are the messages that we need to hear, because that is the truth. That is the truth. The fantastic spirit of human invention. So keep hold of that, and keep hold of what are we going to do when we recover from this? What are you going to do when you recover this? What would you really like to do? You know, think about things you'd like to do when this is all over, and plan to do them. So share wisdom, not panic. That's key, including the government, please, including our newspapers, please. Stick to the facts. Be careful of the media. Seek out sources of things that can be helpful to you. Look after your body. All right. It's very easy for us to then go to the supermarket and rely on fast foods. As best you can, use the Mediterranean diet as best you can. Lay off the sugars and the carbohydrates, although they're easy. Try and get as many fresh vegetables as you can. Look after your mind. Check out things that will help you. There are many websites that can do this for you. And I have some talks coming up which will be taking you through how our emotions work and what you can do, how you can use compassion to help your mind and help these difficult emotions like anger and fear and so forth. Consider developing new interests and hobbies. There's some wonderful things on the internet, learning a musical instrument or doing a history degree or Egyptology or whatever it is you fancy. Beware of negativity bias. Beware of being pulled in to being more threatened than you need to be. Beware of sharing panic. In other words, safe relating means that we relate safely. We reassure people. We try as best we can to understand the science a little bit and understand the risk. The risk of us dying from the virus is not zero, but it's not very high either. Okay, it's very low risk for most of us. For most of us, not for everybody, for most of us. So keep in mind that this phase of life will end, and as I say, think about things you're going to do, but also think about how we can all begin to contribute to the world. This is the most important thing we can be doing right now, is putting our heads together to think about how we contribute to the world we want to live in. And we need to recognize we need massive political change. And this is something I'll be talking about later. Massive political change. We cannot go on in the way that we are for all kinds of reasons that people are very familiar with. We want to create a world where we all support each other. We relate safely to each other. We have social justice. fair share of our resources, and we build our health services around the world. Okay, we learn that we're interdependent as a species. We're a species. Okay, we have to think of ourselves as a species, not one tiny little group or nation that can split itself off from everyone else. That is dead psychology, and if we follow it, we'll end up dead too. So we are we are interconnected species. We have some fantastic talent around the world. They're working, 18 hours a day, some of these people, to get on top of this virus. And we will, We have no doubt about that. So take heart. We will get through this. We will get through this together. And then when we do, we're going to try as best we can to create a better world. And that's all going to be compassion, living for the benefit of others. Thank you.